The Apache chief said, "Choose any one of my daughters, cowboy, you've earned it." Jack Carson had always been a wanderer. Born on the edge of a small Texas town, he had grown up riding horses across open plains, chasing the wind, and helping his father with cattle. Life had been simple, honest, and sometimes hard, but it had taught him to value hard work, honesty, and courage above all else. Now, at 25, he carried those lessons with him wherever he went. His hat was old and worn, his boots dusty from the road, and his eyes held a mix of curiosity and determination. Today he rode into a place that few outsiders dared to enter. Apache territory.
The land changed as he rode further north. The flat, grassy plains gave way to jagged hills and scattered forests.
The air smelled different here, crisper, wilder, filled with the scent of pine and earth after the morning dew.
Jack had heard stories about the Apache people from travelers in nearby towns.
Some spoke of them as fierce warriors who defended their land without fear. Others said they were wise, honorable, and deeply connected to nature. Jack didn't know which stories were true, but he believed that actions spoke louder than words. He wanted to see for himself, not rely on gossip. As he approached a small settlement near the edge of the Apache lands, he noticed the wary glances of the people. Children paused in their play to watch him, and older men whispered among themselves. Jack had become accustomed to being noticed. A lone cowboy on horseback always drew attention, but he knew that here, trust had to be earned. He tipped his hat politely and rode slowly into the center of the village. The wooden buildings were modest but sturdy, and smoke rose from chimneys, carrying the smell of cooking fires. Jack dismounted carefully, patting the side of his horse as if reassuring it that everything would be fine. He stepped forward and introduced himself in a calm voice. "Name's Jack Carson."
"I'm looking for work. I can handle cattle, horses, or anything else that needs doing."
His words were simple, but they carried honesty. The villagers listened quietly. One older man, with deep lines etched into his face and hair streaked with gray, studied Jack carefully. He asked where Jack was from and why he had come so far. Jack spoke plainly, explaining that he wanted work and a chance to prove himself, not to cause trouble. The villagers seemed to relax slightly. They saw no hint of arrogance in him, no desire to show off. Instead, there was a calm confidence, a sense that Jack respected their space and traditions. Word traveled quickly, and soon a young man approached Jack with an offer.
"If you're willing to help with the horses, we could use an extra hand.
But be warned, this is not like other places you've been."
Jack nodded, understanding that respect for the land and the people was more important than the pay.
"I'm willing," he said simply. Over the next few days, Jack worked alongside the villagers.
He helped mend fences, guide horses to the grazing fields, and repair small buildings. He quickly learned that life here was different from the cattle ranches he had worked on back home. Every action had meaning. He noticed how the Apache moved quietly through the forest, how they tracked animals without disturbing the earth, and how they treated each other with patience and care. Jack admired these qualities and tried to match them in his work. He didn't just want to finish the tasks. He wanted to understand the way things were done. One evening after a long day, Jack sat near a fire with some of the villagers. They shared stories of the land, of hunts, and of seasons past.
Jack listened more than he spoke, absorbing the knowledge like a sponge.
An older woman told him about the history of their people, the struggles they had faced, and the values they held most dear: courage, honesty, and respect for nature. Jack realized that this wasn't just a place to work. It was a community with its own rules, its own sense of honor. And if he wanted to be accepted, he would have to earn that respect, not demand it. As days turned into a week, Jack began to notice subtle signs that he was slowly gaining trust.
Villagers would nod at him in greeting, offer advice without hesitation, and even include him in their daily routines.
He started to understand the rhythm of life here. The quiet moments in the morning, the hard work during the day, and the shared stories in the evening.
Brit. Jack felt a sense of belonging that he hadn't expected. For the first time in a long while, he realized that he was not just passing through. Brit. He wanted to be a part of this place, to learn from it, and maybe even leave a mark of his own. One morning, as Jack helped guide horses through the hills, he caught sight of a group of men on the ridge. They were warriors, tall and strong, watching the valley below. Jack stopped and observed from a distance, careful not to intrude. Brit. He had heard stories of Chief Tayanita, the leader of the Apache, a man known for his wisdom, courage, and fairness. The chief rarely appeared in public, and when he did, it was always with purpose. Brit. Jack felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Meeting the chief would be a moment of truth. Would he be accepted, or would he remain an outsider? Brit. Jack continued his work, focusing on his duties while keeping an eye on the ridge. Days later, word came that Chief Tayanita would be visiting the village to oversee preparations for an important ceremony. Brit. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about the chief's expectations. Jack listened carefully, remembering all the lessons he had learned so far. Respect, patience, humility. Brit. He knew that how he behaved in the presence of the chief would matter more than any work he had done before. The morning of the ceremony arrived, and Jack rode to the center of the village early. The sun was just rising, painting the hills in shades of gold and pink. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and the air was filled with anticipation. Brit.
Villagers moved about with quiet purpose, setting up decorations, preparing food, and ensuring everything was in order. Jack helped where he could, making sure to follow instructions exactly and to avoid standing out too much.
Brit. He wanted to show that he was capable and trustworthy, not boastful. When Chief Tayanita finally arrived, Jack felt a sense of awe. Brit. The chief was tall and strong, with eyes that seemed to see everything. He moved with quiet authority, speaking few words but making every gesture meaningful. Brit. The villagers bowed or knelt in respect, and Jack instinctively followed their lead. He introduced himself when prompted, keeping his voice calm and steady. The chief listened, nodding occasionally, but his expression revealed nothing. Jack understood that actions, not words, would be the true test of his character. Brit. Over the next few days, Jack observed the chief closely. He watched how Tayanita treated his people, how he listened before speaking, and how he balanced strength with kindness. Brit. Jack realized that respect had to be earned through deeds, not charm or talk. He focused even harder on his work, helping the village prepare for ceremonies, assisting with horses, and offering to carry out tasks others might avoid. But slowly he felt a change in the way the villagers looked at him. Not just as an outsider, but as someone who belonged, someone who could be trusted. One evening, as Jack sat near the fire reflecting on the days he had spent in the village, he felt a sense of calm he hadn't known before. Brit.
The land was beautiful, wild, and full of life.
Brit. The people were strong, wise, and honorable. And for the first time, Jack realized that he had found a place where he could truly make a difference, where he could prove himself not just to others, but to himself. Desperate, he knew challenges lay ahead, but he felt ready. For Jack Carson, this was only the beginning of a journey that would test his courage, his integrity, and his heart in ways he had never imagined. Brit. And so, with the rising sun casting long shadows across the hills, Jack took a deep breath, tightened his grip on the reins, and prepared for whatever came next. Brit. The land, the people, and even Chief Tayanita himself would soon see if this wandering cowboy had what it took to earn a place among them. And perhaps, one day, a deeper connection that went beyond work and respect. Brit. Days passed in the Apache village, and Jack Carson settled into the rhythm of life there.
Each morning the sun rose over the hills, painting the valley in warm gold, and each evening the air cooled, carrying the soft sounds of birds and the gentle murmur of the river.
Brit. Jack had learned to wake early, tend to the horses, repair fences, and assist wherever he could. Yet he knew that true acceptance wasn't given freely. It had to be earned. Brit. And earning the trust of the Apache people meant understanding more than just work. It meant understanding their values, their ways, and their courage. Brit. One afternoon, as Jack guided a small herd of horses through a narrow trail between hills, he noticed a group of young men moving through the trees ahead. They were warriors from the tribe, their movements quiet but confident. Brit. Jack slowed his pace, keeping a respectful distance. He remembered the stories he had heard about Chief Tyanita's warriors. Brave, disciplined, and loyal to the land and their people. Psst. He watched them carefully, trying to learn from the way they observed the surroundings, the way they moved with purpose and calm. But Jack realized that even small actions carried meaning here. Every step, every glance, every gesture mattered.
As he continued, Jack saw a young boy struggling to herd a stubborn pony. The pony refused to follow the trail, kicking and twisting its head.
Jack approached slowly, speaking softly, as he had been taught by one of the elders. "Easy now," he said, extending a hand. The pony's tension eased slightly, and Jack gently guided it back onto the trail. The boy looked at him with wide eyes, a mixture of awe and respect. "Thank you," he said quietly. Jack nodded, understanding that even small acts of patience and kindness could speak louder than words in this land. That evening, Jack joined a gathering near the fire, where the villagers shared stories about the land, their ancestors, and the values they held dear.
He listened intently, asking questions only when appropriate, always careful not to interrupt.
One elder spoke about the importance of courage, not the kind that came from showing strength, but the kind that came from standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Another spoke of honesty, emphasizing that a person's word was their bond and that breaking it could damage trust forever. Jack nodded, realizing that the lessons he had learned on the plains of Texas were only part of what he needed to survive and thrive here. A week later, news arrived that a group of settlers had accidentally trespassed onto Apache land. Tensions were rising, as both sides feared conflict. Jack felt a knot in his stomach. He had seen conflict before, but he knew that this situation required more than bravery. It required wisdom, patience, and careful negotiation. When the chief's advisors discussed the matter, Jack quietly offered his perspective.
"Maybe we can speak to them before things get worse," he suggested.
"Show them respect, but also explain the rules clearly." The advisors exchanged glances. One elder nodded slowly, and the message was passed along to the chief. Jack realized that the chief valued his opinion, but only because he had demonstrated respect and understanding. The following morning, Jack rode with a small group of Apache warriors to meet the settlers. The tension was thick, but Jack remained calm. He spoke plainly, explaining that the settlers had entered land that was not theirs to use, and that respecting the tribe's boundaries was necessary for peace. The settlers, though nervous, listened. Jack's presence seemed to ease the situation. They saw a young man who was neither aggressive nor judgmental, but fair and honest. By the time the meeting ended, the settlers had agreed to leave the land and follow proper channels in the future. Jack felt a deep sense of relief. This was not just about stopping a conflict. It was about building trust, bridging two very different worlds. After this, Chief Tyanita began to observe Jack more closely. The chief had heard of the young cowboy's role in preventing the conflict, and though he did not speak much, his presence was enough to command respect. Jack noticed the chief watching from a distance, seeing how he worked, how he treated others, and how he behaved under pressure. Jack knew that the silent scrutiny was a true test. He could feel the weight of the chief's gaze, but instead of fear, he felt determination. He wanted to prove that his courage and honesty were real, not just words or luck.
One afternoon, the chief summoned Jack. The two of them walked along a winding path in the hills, away from the village.
The sun was high, casting sharp shadows across the ground. Jack's heart beat faster. He did not know exactly what the chief wanted, but he understood that this could be a turning point in his life. They walked in silence for several minutes before Chief Tyanita finally spoke. "I have watched you, Jack Carson," he said in a calm, strong voice. "You work hard."
You show respect. You do not seek to take what is not yours.
These are rare qualities. But respect must be proven, not spoken. Desperate, Jack nodded, listening intently. The chief explained that there was a task that would test Jack's courage, patience, and understanding of the land. He would have to undertake a hunt to provide food for the community. The task would not be easy. The terrain was rugged, the animals cautious, and the weather unpredictable. But completing it successfully would show that Jack was not only brave, but also capable of understanding the balance between people and nature. Jack felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This was more than a test of skill. It was a test of character. Over the next few days, Jack prepared for the hunt. He studied the paths through the hills, observed the wildlife, and sought advice from villagers who were skilled hunters. They taught him how to move quietly, how to track without leaving a trace, and how to respect the animals he hunted. Jack realized that this was not about taking life carelessly, but about survival, respect, and responsibility. He spent hours practicing, learning to be patient, and understanding that rushing would lead to failure. The morning of the hunt arrived, and Jack set out before sunrise. The air was cold, and the mist hung low over the hills. Every sound seemed amplified: the rustle of leaves, the call of a bird, the distant movement of an animal. Jack moved slowly and carefully, remembering the lessons he had learned. Hours passed, and he faced challenges he had never encountered before. Steep cliffs, tangled brush, and sudden weather changes tested his endurance. At one point he slipped on a wet rock and fell, scraping his arm. But he did not give up. He reminded himself that perseverance was part of courage. Finally, Jack spotted a herd of deer grazing near a stream. He approached cautiously, staying downwind and moving quietly. He observed the animals, waiting for the right moment. When the time came, he used the skills he had learned to make the hunt successful without causing unnecessary harm or disturbance. By the afternoon, he had captured enough to provide for the village. Exhausted but proud, Jack began the long walk back, carrying the fruits of his labor. When he returned to the village, the elders and warriors gathered to see his success. The chief was there, standing silently as Jack presented the food. There was no fanfare, no applause, only a quiet acknowledgement of effort, skill, and respect. Jack felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Desperate, he had not only completed the hunt, but had done so in a way that honored the land, the animals, and the people. For the first time, he felt that he was not just an outsider. He was someone who could be trusted, someone who belonged. That evening, Jack sat by the fire reflecting on the journey of the past weeks. He thought about the lessons he had learned. Courage was not just fighting, honesty was not just speaking truth, and respect was not just following rules. It was understanding the spirit behind them. He had faced challenges, learned from them, and grown stronger, not just in skill, but in character. The Apache people had begun to accept him, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. As the night deepened and the stars appeared above the hills, Jack felt a quiet sense of hope. He had come into Apache territory as a stranger, carrying only his experience and his desire to do right. Now he had found a place where his actions mattered, where his character was tested, and where trust was slowly being built. Jack Carson knew that this was only the beginning. The real challenges, the deeper connections, and the lessons that would shape the rest of his life were still ahead. But for the first time, he felt ready to face them, with courage, respect, and an open heart. Desperate. After successfully completing the hunt, Jack Carson felt a quiet sense of pride, but he also knew that the real test of his character was far from over. Living among the Apache people required more than skill with a horse or a rifle. It required understanding, patience, and humility. Jack had earned their respect through work, courage, and honesty, but he was still an outsider in their eyes. He understood that to truly belong, he had to continue proving himself, not just through actions, but through the choices he made when faced with difficult situations. A few days after the hunt, a messenger arrived in the village. He carried urgent news. A neighboring group of settlers was having trouble with a runaway herd of cattle. The settlers had tried to round them up themselves, but their efforts had failed, and the animals were straying dangerously close to Apache lands. Tensions were rising, as the settlers feared punishment for trespassing, and the Apache feared damage to their territory. Jack listened to the elders discuss the situation, sensing an opportunity to demonstrate his ability to navigate a delicate problem. "I can help," Jack said cautiously.
I've worked with cattle before, and I understand how to guide them safely. Maybe I can prevent any harm without causing conflict."
The elders exchanged glances.
They had seen Jack's courage and skill in the hunt, but now he was proposing something that required diplomacy, patience, and careful judgment. After a short discussion, they agreed, and Jack set out with a small team of Apache men, carrying ropes, blankets, and tools to corral the herd safely. The journey to the settlers' land was not easy.
The terrain was rugged, with hills, streams, and patches of dense forest. Jack led the group carefully, making sure the cattle stayed together while avoiding obstacles that could injure them. Along the way, he observed the Apache men closely. Their movements were precise, deliberate, and full of quiet confidence. Jack tried to mimic their style, learning to move as one with the land, rather than forcing it to bend to his will. The day was long, and the sun beat down on them relentlessly, but Jack felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before.
By late afternoon, they reached the runaway herd. The cattle were scattered across a wide field, frightened and restless.
Jack felt a pang of nervousness. Controlling a group of frightened animals was no easy task, and one wrong move could lead to disaster. He took a deep breath, recalling the lessons he had learned from the elders: patience, observation. Slowly, calmly, he began guiding the herd toward a safer area, signaling to the Apache men who assisted him at every turn.
Hours passed, and Jack's arms ached from holding ropes and guiding the animals, but he refused to give up.
As night fell, a sudden storm rolled in. Dark clouds covered the sky, and heavy rain began to pour. The ground became slippery. The cattle panicked, and the group faced new challenges. Jack's heart raced, but he reminded himself that fear would not solve the problem. With careful coordination, he helped the Apache men calm the herd, using soft words and steady movements. The storm raged on, but Jack refused to leave the field until every animal was safe. Finally, drenched and exhausted, the group managed to secure the herd in a safe enclosure. Relief washed over him, and for the first time he allowed himself a small smile.
The settlers arrived the next morning, grateful and amazed at the safe handling of the cattle.
They offered thanks and even tried to reward Jack with coins, but he politely refused. He knew that what he had done was not about money. It was about doing the right thing.
Apache. The Apache elders nodded in approval, and Jack felt a quiet pride in knowing that he had helped both communities without causing harm or conflict. But he realized that courage wasn't just about facing danger. It was also about making careful, thoughtful decisions that respected everyone involved. In the days that followed, Jack continued to work closely with the Apache community. He learned more about their traditions, their dances, their songs, and their stories. He saw how deeply connected they were to the land, how every plant, animal, and river had meaning. Jack began to see the world through their eyes, appreciating the delicate balance they maintained with nature. One morning, the chief summoned Jack again. This time, he led him to a high ridge overlooking the valley. The wind whipped around them, and the view stretched for miles, rolling hills, forests, and distant rivers. The chief spoke in a calm, deliberate tone. Jack Carson, you have shown courage and skill. You have proven yourself in action, and you have shown respect for this land and for my people. But respect is not only earned through deeds. It is also earned through understanding the heart, the spirit that guides us all. Jack listened intently, feeling the weight of the words. The chief explained that there was a greater challenge ahead, one that would test Jack's wisdom, not just his strength. A dangerous situation had arisen with a neighboring tribe, not through hostility but through misunderstanding. Miscommunication had led to a minor conflict, and Jack's role would be to act as a messenger and mediator. He would need to speak carefully, listen even more carefully, and ensure that both sides understood each other. The task required courage of a different kind, a courage of the mind and heart rather than the body. Jack accepted the responsibility without hesitation. He spent the next few days preparing, learning everything he could about the neighboring tribe's customs and concerns. He consulted the elders, who offered guidance on words, gestures, and traditions to observe. Jack realized that every detail mattered. Even a small mistake could cause offense or worsen the situation. He practiced patience, learning to remain calm under pressure, and rehearsed the points he needed to communicate. By the time he set out, he felt nervous but also ready to face this new kind of test. The journey to the neighboring tribe was long and challenging. Jack traveled on horseback, navigating winding trails and dense forests. He thought about what the chief had taught him: to act with respect, to listen with an open heart, and to speak with honesty. When he arrived, he was met with suspicion, as the outsiders always were. But Jack remained calm, greeting them politely and explaining his purpose. Slowly, the atmosphere began to shift. He listened to their concerns, asked questions, and clarified misunderstandings without judgment or anger. Hours passed, but Jack's patience never wavered. He negotiated carefully, making sure both sides understood each other. But by the evening, what had begun as a tense standoff had transformed into a respectful agreement. Both groups expressed gratitude, and the neighboring tribe even offered small gifts as a token of goodwill. Jack felt an immense sense of relief and accomplishment. He had succeeded in a challenge that required not just courage, but empathy, intelligence, and careful thought. For the first time, he understood the deeper meaning of respect and honor in this culture. Returning to the Apache village, Jack was greeted with quiet approval from the elders and warriors. Chief Tyanita observed him closely, but there was a subtle change in the chief's expression, a hint of pride, a silent acknowledgement of Jack's growth. That night, as Jack sat by the fire, he reflected on the journey so far. He realized that courage was not just facing danger or completing difficult tasks. True courage, he understood, was also about responsibility, understanding, and the willingness to face challenges that tested the mind and heart. Over the next few weeks, Jack continued to integrate himself into the village. He assisted with daily chores, helped with hunts, guided newcomers, and learned more about Apache customs.
Villagers began to seek his advice on practical matters, signaling a growing trust. Jack felt a deep sense of belonging, but he remained humble. He knew that acceptance was a continuous journey, not a single event.
Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities to demonstrate integrity and respect. By the end of the third month, Jack Carson had transformed from an outsider into a valued member of the community.
He had proven himself through action, thought, and heart. He had faced danger in the hunt, demonstrated patience and wisdom in negotiation, and shown kindness and honesty in everyday life. And though he was still a young man, he understood that the journey ahead would test him even further. The chief had already hinted at future challenges, and Jack knew that each would demand more than courage. It would demand understanding, respect, and the willingness to grow. As the sun set over the valley, Jack stood on a small hill overlooking the village. The firelight flickered across the faces of the people he had come to admire. The horses grazed quietly, and the wind carried the soft sounds of the river. He felt a quiet satisfaction, but also a sense of anticipation. He had proven himself in ways he had never imagined, yet he knew this was only the beginning. Greater tests, deeper connections, and the true measure of his character still lay ahead. And Jack Carson, the wandering cowboy from Texas, felt ready to face them all, with courage, respect, and an open heart. Weeks had passed since Jack Carson had successfully mediated the dispute with a neighboring tribe, and his place in the Apache village had grown stronger. The villagers had begun to rely on him not only for his skill with horses and cattle, but also for his calm judgment and his willingness to act with fairness. Jack felt a sense of pride but also humility. He knew that acceptance in this community was earned every day, not given lightly, and he approached each task with care and respect. One morning, Chief Tyanita summoned Jack to a quiet part of the village. The chief led him to a shaded area near a flowing river, where the sunlight danced on the water and the air smelled faintly of pine and earth. Jack could see the seriousness in the chief's eyes. He sensed that this meeting would be important, perhaps even life-changing. The chief spoke slowly, each word deliberate.
Jack Carson, he said, you have shown skill, courage, and understanding. You have proven yourself not only through deeds, but through your heart.
But now you must prove yourself in a way that is more personal. Jack listened carefully, his curiosity rising. Desperate, he had faced physical challenges and difficult negotiations, but he had no idea what the chief could mean by a personal test. The chief continued, explaining that the time had come for Jack to meet the chief's family. To be fully accepted, the chief said, one must understand not only the land and the people, but also the bonds of family and trust. You will meet my daughters, and your actions will show whether you honor them in this community.
Jack felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Meeting the chief's family was a tremendous honor, but he also understood the weight of responsibility that came with it.
Over the next few days, Jack observed the chief's family from a distance, learning about their routines and respecting their privacy.
The chief had 2 daughters, both strong and intelligent young women who were skilled in the ways of their people.
Jack admired their grace and determination, but he kept his distance, knowing that respect meant not rushing into relationships or trying to impress with words alone. Instead, he focused on helping the village in meaningful ways, earning trust through action rather than display. Finally, the day came when Jack was invited to meet the daughters formally. The ceremony was simple but solemn. Villagers gathered, their faces reflecting curiosity, respect, and pride. Jack approached with calm confidence, bowing slightly in acknowledgement of their traditions.
The chief's daughters observed him with keen eyes, assessing his character silently.
Jack greeted them respectfully, speaking with sincerity and humility.
He asked about their daily life, shared his own experiences honestly, and listened attentively.
His genuine interest and respectful demeanor began to break down the invisible barrier between outsider and family.
Over the next several days, Jack spent more time with the daughters, helping them with tasks, sharing stories, and learning about their lives. He observed how they moved through the village with purpose, how they cared for animals, and how they supported each other and the community.
Jack realized that to earn their trust, he needed to act with integrity at every moment, to respect their choices, and to contribute to the community without expecting personal reward. Each small interaction became an opportunity to demonstrate his character. But one afternoon, the chief called Jack aside again.
Jack, he said, you have shown patience, skill, and honesty. You have earned the respect of my people.
But respect for family is deeper. It is earned through actions that show care, thoughtfulness, and understanding.
The chief explained that Jack would face a challenge that would test these qualities directly. A young horse known for being stubborn and difficult had escaped from the village corral. It was fast, clever, and easily frightened. Retrieving the horse required not only skill but patience, empathy, and careful observation, qualities that reflected how Jack would approach relationships and trust. Jack accepted the challenge without hesitation. He spent the afternoon preparing, studying the horse's habits, the terrain, and the safest paths to approach it. He consulted the chief's daughters, who offered advice about handling animals with respect rather than force.
Jack listened carefully, understanding that this task was not just about catching the horse. It was about showing thoughtfulness, patience, and care, qualities that would also apply to his relationship with the chief's family.
When Jack finally set out to retrieve the horse, he moved slowly and deliberately, observing every detail. The horse was quick to react, darting between trees and hills, but Jack remained calm.
He spoke softly, used gentle gestures, and allowed the horse to move at its own pace. Hours passed, and Jack faced challenges along the way, slippery rocks, tangled underbrush, and sudden weather changes that made the terrain even more difficult. Yet he did not give up. He remembered the chief's words about patience and understanding, and he applied them to every step. By late afternoon, Jack had finally guided the horse safely back to the corral. He had done so without force, without panic, and without causing harm to the animal. The villagers, who had observed his efforts from a distance, were impressed not only by his success, but by the care and respect he had shown throughout the process. The chief's daughters watched with quiet approval, recognizing that Jack's actions reflected qualities they valued deeply: empathy, patience, and responsibility. That evening, as the village gathered around the fire, Chief Tyanita spoke.
Jack Carson, he said, you have faced challenges that tested your strength, your courage, and your wisdom. You have now faced a challenge that tested your heart.
You have shown respect not only for the land and our people, but for life itself. This is the measure of a person. Jack felt a sense of pride, but also humility. He understood that true honor came not from recognition, but from doing what was right, even when it was difficult. The chief then made a gesture that surprised Jack. In the quiet of the evening, he spoke with a calm authority. You have earned the trust of my people, Jack. You have proven yourself worthy. And now, in the way of our tradition, I offer you the choice of my daughters. You have earned it through your deeds, your character, and your heart. Jack was taken aback. He had expected challenges, tests, and lessons, but this offer carried profound meaning. It was not merely about marriage or romance. It was a gesture of honor, trust, and deep cultural significance. Jack spent the next days reflecting on the chief's words.
He understood the weight of the offer, and he knew that any choice he made would have lasting consequences. He observed the daughters more closely, not with superficial judgment, but with careful attention to their personalities, values, and compatibility.
He engaged in conversation, shared stories, and learned from their experiences. Jack realized that respect, empathy, and shared values were the foundation of any meaningful relationship, far more important than appearances or fleeting attraction.
Over time, Jack grew closer to the daughters through shared work and conversation.
He helped them tend the animals, repair structures, and prepare meals. They shared laughter, challenges, and quiet moments of reflection.
Jack admired their intelligence, kindness, and strength. He understood that any relationship required mutual respect and understanding, and he approached each interaction with honesty and sincerity. Slowly, trust and friendship deepened, forming a bond built on shared values and genuine care.
By the end of the 4th week, Jack had made his decision.
He chose the daughter whose personality, values, and spirit aligned most closely with his own. When he spoke to the chief and expressed his choice respectfully, the chief nodded with approval. The villagers welcomed the decision, recognizing Jack's thoughtfulness, humility, and genuine respect. Jack felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not from personal gain, but from the knowledge that he had honored the chief, the community, and the family in a meaningful way. That evening, as the sun set over the hills and the firelight flickered across the village, Jack reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had arrived as a stranger, uncertain of his place, and had faced physical challenges, moral tests, and emotional lessons. He had learned patience, courage, empathy, and respect, and now he had formed a bond with a family and a community that had once seemed distant and mysterious. Jack Carson understood that true belonging was not given lightly. It was earned through action, character, and heart. As the night deepened and stars appeared in the sky, Jack felt a quiet sense of hope and anticipation.
He had proven himself worthy of the chief's trust and the respect of the community.
But he also knew that life was a continuous journey of learning, challenges, and growth. The experiences he had faced so far were only the beginning, and greater tests lay ahead. Yet Jack felt ready to meet them with courage, wisdom, and an open heart, knowing that he had the trust of a community that had become his home. The weeks passed in the Apache village, and Jack Carson felt a deep sense of belonging that he had never known before. He had come to the territory as a stranger, a wandering cowboy seeking work and adventure. But he had grown into much more than that. He had become a trusted member of the community, respected not only for his skill and courage, but for his honesty, patience, and thoughtfulness. The lessons he had learned, the value of respect, the importance of integrity, and the meaning of courage had become part of him, shaping every action, every choice, and every interaction.
Life in the village had settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and challenging.
Each day brought work, but also opportunity. Jack helped tend the animals, guided newcomers, repaired buildings, and assisted in preparing for community ceremonies. But he continued to learn from Chief Tyanita and the elders, absorbing knowledge about the land, the people, and the traditions that had been passed down for generations. Even the smallest tasks held meaning here. Every stitch in a fence, every carefully guided horse, every conversation carried significance. Jack understood now that living in this world required mindfulness and care, and he embraced it fully. Jack's bond with the chief's daughters had grown stronger. He had chosen one with whom he shared deep respect, understanding, and common values. Their relationship was built on friendship first, trust second, and a growing mutual admiration. They worked together daily, learning from each other, helping the village, and sharing quiet moments of laughter and reflection. Jack had never experienced a connection like this. It was not based on fleeting attraction or superficial charm. It was rooted in honesty, shared effort, and genuine care. Through this bond, Jack realized the importance of humility and patience in every relationship. One day, Chief Tyanita called Jack to a special gathering. The elders, the warriors, and the villagers were all present, their faces showing curiosity, respect, and expectation. Jack understood that something important was about to happen. The chief spoke with calm authority, recounting Jack's journey from outsider to trusted member of the community. But he praised Jack for his courage in the hunt, his patience in mediating conflicts, his careful handling of the runaway cattle, and his respectful treatment of the chief's family. But each deed was acknowledged, and Jack felt a deep sense of pride, not for personal glory, but for the knowledge that his actions had earned genuine respect. The chief then addressed the community with a gesture of significance. He invited Jack to stand beside him and explained to the villagers that Jack had demonstrated qualities that were rare and precious: honesty, courage, empathy, and integrity. He emphasized that Jack had not only proven himself in action, but also in thought and heart. The villagers listened intently, and a quiet applause and murmurs of approval spread among them. Jack felt the weight of this recognition, not as a reward, but as a responsibility. He understood that belonging meant continual effort, and that trust could never be taken for granted. The chief spoke directly to Jack, his tone solemn but warm. Jack Carson, you have proven yourself worthy of this land, this community, and the trust of my family, but there is one more step before full acceptance, a demonstration of your commitment to our way of life, our values, and the bonds that hold us together. He had faced challenges before, but he knew that this test would be different. It would require not only skill and courage, but understanding, wisdom, and the ability to act with both heart and mind. The chief explained the task. A young stallion had wandered into the forest, separated from its herd. It was a strong and spirited horse, known to be difficult to handle. Bringing it back safely would require patience, careful observation, and respect for the animal's instincts. Jack understood immediately that this was symbolic as well as practical. Desperate. Handling the stallion successfully would reflect his ability to balance courage with empathy, strength with gentleness, and action with thoughtfulness, the same qualities needed to sustain relationships, community trust, and personal integrity. Jack set out before dawn, the air crisp and quiet. The forest was dense, filled with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. He moved carefully, keeping low and observing every detail, listening to the subtle signs of the land. Hours passed, and he tracked the stallion through winding paths, steep hills, and shallow streams. The horse was cautious, alert, and quick to react. Jack remained calm, speaking softly and making gentle movements to avoid startling it. He remembered the lessons of patience, humility, and respect that Chief Tyanita and the elders had taught him. Every step, every action mattered. As midday approached, Jack faced his first major challenge. The stallion darted toward a narrow cliffside path, panicked by a sudden noise. Jack's heart pounded, but he did not rush. He carefully positioned himself, using gentle guidance to lead the horse to safer ground. Sweat poured down his face. His arms ached from effort, and the terrain was treacherous, yet he did not give up. Hours of observation and careful patience had prepared him for this moment. Finally, by late afternoon, Jack succeeded in bringing the stallion safely back to the village corral. The villagers who had been watching from a distance were impressed not only by his success but by the care and respect he had shown. That evening, as the village gathered around the fire, Chief Tyanita spoke again. "Jack Carson," he said, "you have faced challenges that tested your courage, your wisdom, and your patience. You have now faced a challenge that tested your heart. You have shown respect not only for people, but for life itself.
This is the measure of a true member of our community."
Jack felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He understood that belonging was not about recognition or reward. It was about responsibility, care, and consistent action. Following this, the chief formally acknowledged Jack as a full member of the community. Villagers celebrated quietly but warmly, sharing food, laughter, and stories late into the night. Jack felt a profound sense of belonging. He had arrived as a wandering cowboy seeking work, uncertain of his place, and had become someone trusted, respected, and valued. He had grown not only in skill and courage but in character, understanding, and empathy. The lessons he had learned would remain with him forever, shaping the way he lived, worked, and related to others. Jack's relationship with the chief's daughter flourished. They worked side by side, shared experiences, and supported each other in daily life. Their bond was built on trust, understanding, and shared values.
Jack realized that love was not about grand gestures or fleeting passion, but about mutual respect, patience, and commitment.
He had found a connection deeper than he had ever imagined, one that reflected the principles of integrity, empathy, and courage that had guided his journey.
Over the following months, Jack continued to contribute to the village in meaningful ways.
He taught younger members about skills he had learned in his travels, helped mediate disputes, and assisted in preparing for seasonal ceremonies.
At every turn, he applied the lessons he had learned: patience, respect, honesty, and courage.
He observed the land carefully, tending to its needs as the villagers did, and he strengthened bonds not only with the chief and his family, but with the entire community. Jack had become a bridge between worlds, someone who understood both the life of a cowboy and the wisdom of the Apache people. One evening, Jack walked to the ridge overlooking the valley, the sun setting in brilliant shades of gold and orange. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from a wandering cowboy with no clear path to a trusted member of the community who had earned respect through deeds, character, and heart. He thought about the challenges he had faced, the lessons he had learned, and the relationships he had formed. Each experience had shaped him, each test had strengthened him, and each act of respect had brought him closer to belonging. As darkness fell and the stars appeared above, Jack felt a deep sense of peace. He had found a home, a purpose, and a community that valued courage, honesty, and empathy. He had formed bonds that would last a lifetime and had learned lessons that would guide him for years to come. For the first time in his life, he truly understood the meaning of respect, belonging, and love. And he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them with courage, patience, and an open heart. Jack Carson had arrived as a stranger in a foreign land, but he left as a man who had proven himself in action, character, and spirit. The Apache people had become his family, the land his home, and the lessons he had learned his guiding principles. The story of his journey, the hunts, the challenges, the tests of courage, wisdom, and heart, would be remembered not as a tale of adventure alone, but as a story of growth, integrity, and the power of earning trust through patience, respect, and action. And as the village settled in a quiet night, with fires glowing softly and the gentle sounds of nature all around, Jack knew that he had found something rare and precious, a life filled with meaning, connection, and honor. His journey had begun as a search for work, but it had transformed into a path of understanding, belonging, and love. And for Jack Carson, the wandering cowboy, this was only the beginning of a life well lived, guided by the lessons of courage, honesty, and respect he had earned among the Apache people.